smell of death had a particular sweetness to it that Clara Whitmore would never forget, clinging to the rough timber walls of their cramped room above the saloon in Kingston, Nevada, mingling with the scent of her mother's lavender water that had long since stopped masking the sickness. It was August of 1876, and the summer heat pressed down on the silver mining town like a physical weight, making every breath feel stolen. Clara sat perfectly still on the edge of the narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap, staring at her mother's face, which had finally gone slack after 3 days of agony. She was 18 years old, and she had just become an orphan. The tears came without permission, sliding hot and silent down her cheeks. Her mother, Margaret Whitmore, had been all she had in this world since her father died in a mining accident when Clara was only 7. They had scraped by on her mother's sewing work and Clara's wages from washing dishes at the hotel, always just one disaster away from destitution. Now that disaster had arrived, wearing the face of consumption that had hollowed her mother out from the inside over 6 terrible months. The door crashed open with such violence that Clara jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her stepfather, Samuel Garrett, a man her mother had married only 9 months ago in a desperate bid for security, filled the doorway. His face was flushed with whiskey, his eyes mean and cold. Clara had never trusted him, had warned her mother against the match, but Margaret had been so tired, so worn down by poverty and sickness that was already taking root in her lungs. She dead then? Samuel's voice was flat, businesslike, as if he were asking about the weather. Yes, Clara whispered, her voice breaking. Just now I need to go fetch the undertaker. No point wasting money on that. Samuel moved into the room, and Clara caught the overwhelming stench of cheap liquor and tobacco. I will have some boys haul her out to the pauper's field in the morning. Right now we need to talk about your situation. Fresh tears spilled down Clara's face. She deserves better than a pauper's grave. She was a good woman. I have some money saved. I can pay for a proper burial. Samuel's hand cracked across her face so hard that she fell sideways on the bed, her ear ringing, stars exploding across her vision. Shut that crying up right now. I will not have a blubbering girl under my roof. Your mother is dead. Crying will not bring her back. Clara pressed her hand to her burning cheek, trying desperately to stop the tears, but grief had its own momentum. A sob broke from her chest, raw and ragged, and she turned her face into the thin pillow to muffle the sound. The second blow caught her across the shoulders, Samuel's belt this time. I said, stop that crying. His voice rose to a roar. Weak, pathetic girl. No wonder your mother worked herself to death trying to keep you fed. The leather bit into her back again and again as Clara curled into a ball, trying to protect herself, trying to stop crying and only crying harder for the effort. Through her tears, she could see her mother's body still lying there, peaceful now after so much suffering, and the wrongness of this moment, of being beaten while her mother grew cold, made something crack open inside her chest. Please, she gasped, please stop. But Samuel was beyond reason. His rage and grief and guilt at marrying a dying woman for her daughter's wages all twisted into something ugly. The beating continued until Clara could no longer cry, could barely breathe, each sob catching on ribs that screamed with pain. Finally, Samuel threw his belt aside. You've got 3 days to find somewhere else to live. This room was rented under my name, and I'm not keeping you. You are old enough to make your own way. Maybe one of the saloons will take you on. God knows you are pretty enough, even if you are useless for much else. He left, slamming the door behind him, and Clara lay there in the dark with her dead mother, her body a map of pain, her tears finally spent. She had cried until there was nothing left inside her but emptiness and the certain knowledge that she was completely alone in the world. The next 3 days passed in a blur of pain and desperate searching. Clara managed to scrape together enough money from her savings to pay for a simple pine coffin and a plot in the church cemetery, though it took every cent she had. She stood alone at the graveside while the preacher said words that meant nothing. her body aching, her future a blank wall she could not see past. She tried every respectable establishment in Kingston. The hotel where she had washed dishes told her they had no positions available. The general store, the milliner, the bakery all turned her away. Jobs were scarce, and a girl with no family and no prospects was a risk no one wanted to take. By the third evening, Clara found herself standing outside the Lucky Silver Saloon, her few possessions in a carpet bag, knowing she had nowhere else to go. The saloon owner, a hard-eyed woman named Dolly, looked her up and down. "You ever worked a saloon before?" "No, madam, but I am a hard worker. I can serve drinks, clean, whatever you need." Dolly's expression was not unkind, but it was not warm either. "I can give you work serving drinks. You'll get $1 a day plus tips, and you can sleep in the storage room out back, but I run a respectable place, you understand? My girls serve drinks and nothing else. Any man gets handsy, you tell me, and I will deal with it. But you cross that line yourself, and you are out. Understood?" "Yes, madam, thank you." Clara felt weak with relief. It was not much, but it was something. That night, she served her first customers in the Lucky Silver, learning quickly to dodge wandering hands and deflect crude propositions with a smile that did not reach her eyes. The storage room was cramped and smelled of beer, but it had a lock on the door and a narrow cot, and after 3 days of terror, it felt like sanctuary. 6 weeks passed. Clara developed calluses on her feet from the long hours and a brittle shell around her heart. She spoke to no one more than necessary, smiled when required, and saved every penny she could. She had no plan beyond surviving 1 day at a time, but survival was enough. It was late September when the cowboy walked into the Lucky Silver, and Clara noticed him immediately because he was different from the usual clientele. Most of the men who came through were miners, rough and loud, their clothes perpetually stained with rock dust and sweat. This man moved with a quiet confidence, his boots worn but well-made, his hat pushed back to reveal sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that would have been almost pretty if not for the hard line of his jaw and the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He took a seat at the bar, far from the rowdy group of miners in the corner, and when Clara approached, he met her eyes with a directness that made her want to look away. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady through practice. "Whiskey, please. The good stuff, if Dolly has any left." His voice was deep and quiet, with an accent she could not quite place. Not local, but not foreign either. Clara poured the drink and set it in front of him, expecting him to turn his attention elsewhere like most men did once they had their liquor. Instead, he continued to watch her with those steady eyes. "You are new here," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have been here 6 weeks." "That is new for Kingston. Most folks either stay forever or leave after a week." He took a sip of his whiskey, never breaking eye contact. "I am Russell Dalton. I run a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of town." Clara had heard the name. The Dalton Ranch was one of the larger spreads in the area, successful enough that Russell Dalton did not need to work as a ranch hand for someone else. She had not expected him to be so young. "Clara Whitmore," she said, because it seemed rude not to introduce herself in return. "Pleased to meet you, Clara Whitmore." He paused, then added, "You seem sad." The observation was so unexpected, so contrary to the usual saloon chatter, that Clara felt her careful shell crack slightly. "Everyone is sad about something," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Will you be needing anything else?" "No, madam, thank you." She moved away, but she could feel his eyes on her for the rest of the evening. He stayed for 2 drinks, spoke to no one else, and left with a polite nod in her direction. Clara told herself she would forget him by morning. But Russell Dalton came back the next evening, and the evening after that. He always sat in the same spot, always ordered the same whiskey, and he always tried to talk to her. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that crossed the lines Dolly had drawn. He asked her about the weather, about Kingston, about whether she had seen the wild horses that sometimes came down from the hills. Clara answered in monosyllables at first, wary of his intentions, but he never asked for anything more than conversation. On the fourth evening, Dolly pulled Clara aside. "That Dalton boy is sweet on you." Clara felt her face heat. "He is just friendly." "Honey, men do not come to saloons 4 nights in a row to be friendly. They come for liquor or women," and he barely touches his drink. "He's working up the courage to ask you something. You could do worse. He has got a good reputation, treats his ranch hands fair, does not gamble or drink to excess. Not many of those around here." "I am not interested in courting," Clara said firmly. The thought of letting anyone close enough to hurt her again made her chest tighten with panic. "Then you had better tell him that directly, because hope is a hard thing to kill, and it is cruel to let it linger." That evening, when Russell took his usual seat, Clara poured his whiskey and set it down with more force than necessary. "Why do you keep coming here?" He did not seem surprised by her directness. "Because I like talking to you." "Why?" Russell considered this, turning the glass in his hands. "Because you look like someone who understands loss, and because, despite that, you keep going. I admire that." Clara felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight bands that had held her together since her mother's death. "What would you know about loss?" "Enough." His voice was quiet. "I lost my parents and my sister to cholera 8 years ago. I was 17. Thought the world had ended. Some days I still think that." The honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. She found herself sinking onto the stool beside him, something she had never done with a customer. "My mother died 6 weeks ago. Consumption. My stepfather beat me for crying at her deathbed." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Russell's face went hard. "Where is your stepfather now?" "I do not know. I have not seen him since he threw me out. It does not matter." "It matters." Russell's hands had tightened into fists on the bar. "That is not right. That is not how you treat someone who is grieving." "Well, he did, and there is nothing to be done about it now?" Clara stood, suddenly uncomfortable with how much she had revealed. "I need to get back to work." Russell caught her wrist gently, his touch as light as a question. "Clara, if you ever need help, if you ever need anything, you can ask me. I mean that." She pulled away, not because his touch was unwelcome, but because it was too welcome, too warm, too much like hope. "I do not need anyone's help. I am managing fine on my own." She avoided him for the rest of the evening, but his words stayed with her, burrowing under her skin like a splinter. Russell stopped coming to the saloon after that night, and Clara told herself she was relieved. She had no room in her life for complications, for feelings, for the terrifying vulnerability of caring about someone, but she found herself looking for him in the street when she walked to the general store, listening for his voice in the crowd outside the saloon. 2 weeks passed. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the scrub brush in the hills. Clara had just finished her shift and was walking back to her storage room when she heard shouting from the alley beside the saloon. She recognized Samuel's voice immediately, thick with drink and rage. "You owe me, girl! Your mother married me, which means everything she had became mine, including you." Clara's blood turned to ice. She had not seen her stepfather since the day he threw her out, had hoped he had left town or drunk himself to death. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to decide whether to run or hide, when a second voice cut through the darkness. "The lady does not owe you anything. Move along." Russell. Clara felt relief and terror in equal measure. She rushed around the corner to find Russell standing between her and Samuel, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Samuel was swaying, his face flushed and ugly with drink. "This is not your business, Cowboy," Samuel snarled. "This is between me and my stepdaughter. She is 18 years old and no longer under your authority. That makes it my business if I choose to make it so." Russell's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Now I suggest you leave before I have the sheriff involved. I am sure he would be interested to hear about a man who beats a girl at her mother's deathbed. Samuel's face went purple with rage, but he was just sober enough to recognize that he was outmatched. "This is not over," he spat, then staggered off into the night. Clara sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. Russell holstered his gun and turned to her, his face concerned. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. You did not need to do that." "Yes, I did." Russell moved closer, and in the lamplight spilling from the saloon window, Clara could see the anger still simmering in his eyes. "Clara, you cannot keep living like this, looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to come back, come work for me." "What?" She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Come work at my ranch. I need a housekeeper. The place is a mess since old Mrs. Chen retired and moved to San Francisco to live with her daughter. You would have your own room in the house, 3 meals a day, and better wages than you are getting here. You would be safe." It was too much. Too fast, too generous. "Why would you do that for me?" Russell was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because when my family died, a neighbor took me in and gave me work when I had nothing. He taught me everything I know about ranching, left me his herd when he passed. I would not have survived without that kindness. Maybe I cannot pay that back, but I can pay it forward. I do not need charity." "It is not charity. I really do need a housekeeper, and you really do need a safer situation. It is just practical." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I think you deserve a chance to heal somewhere, you're not constantly reminded of loss and pain." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first since that terrible night. "I do not cry anymore," she said, almost apologetically, "for there is nothing left." "Then maybe it is time you had the space to find out if that is true." She should have said no. She should have maintained her careful distance, her protective shell. But she was so tired of being afraid, of being alone, of serving drinks to men who looked at her like she was something to be bought. And Russell Dalton looked at her like she was a person, like she mattered. "All right," she whispered. "I will come work for you." The Dalton ranch was larger than Clara had expected, with a sturdy 2-story house, a big barn, several corrals, and what looked like hundreds of acres of grazing land stretching toward the mountains. Russell had 4 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, men who tipped their hats to her when Russell introduced her, and then went back to their work without comment or leer. The house itself was indeed a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, dust thick on every surface, laundry overflowing the basket. But it was also beautiful, with real glass windows, polished wood floors, and a kitchen that was bigger than the entire room Clara had shared with her mother above the saloon. Russell showed her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor across the hall from his own. It had a real bed with a thick mattress, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the grazing land toward the purple mountains in the distance. Clara set down her carpet bag and turned to find Russell watching her from the doorway. "This is too much," she said. "It is a bedroom. You need a place to sleep." "You know what I mean. This is all too generous. You barely know me." Russell leaned against the doorframe, his expression serious. "I know that you loved your mother enough to spend your last pennies on a decent burial. I know that you work hard and do not complain. I know that you have been through hell and you are still standing. That is enough for me to know. What if I am a terrible housekeeper?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth the first time she had seen him come close to laughing. "Then I will eat a lot of burned dinners and live in a dusty house. Clara, you can leave any time you want. This is not a prison. But while you are here, you are under my protection. And that means something to me, understand?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good, now I will let you settle in. Dinner is usually around 6, nothing fancy. And Clara, you can cry here if you need to. No one will hurt you for it." He left before she could respond, his boots loud on the wooden stairs. Clara sat down on the bed, her hands shaking, and looked around the room that was now hers. She waited for the tears Russell had promised would come, but her eyes stayed dry. She had cried herself empty that terrible night, and she did not know if she would ever have tears again. The first weeks at the ranch passed in a blur of work. Clara threw herself into cleaning with an intensity that bordered on desperation, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, washing windows, organizing the pantry, cooking meals that started out mediocre and gradually improved as she remembered her mother's recipes. Russell worked from dawn to dusk, often coming in exhausted and covered in dust, but he always thanked her for dinner, always asked about her day, always treated her with a respect she was not accustomed to receiving. The ranch hands were a mixed group. There was Tom, the oldest, a weathered man in his 50s who had worked for Russell's benefactor before the ranch changed hands. Miguel and his younger brother Carlos had come up from Mexico looking for work and stayed for Russell's fair wages and steady hand. The youngest was a kid named Billy, barely 20, who blushed whenever Clara spoke to him and tripped over his own feet in his eagerness to help. They all treated her like a lady, which was a new and strange experience. No one made crude jokes or let their hands wander. When she brought lunch out to them in the fields, they thanked her politely and went back to work. At first, Clara waited for the mask to slip, for someone to reveal their true intentions, but gradually she began to accept that Russell had meant what he said. This was a safe place. As October deepened into November, Clara found a rhythm to her days. She woke early to start breakfast, packed lunches for the men, spent the day cleaning and mending and cooking, and had dinner on the table by 6. In the evening, she and Russell often sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, not talking much but comfortable in the silence. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Russell finally spoke about his family. "My sister was about your age when she died," he said, his voice distant. "Her name was Sarah. She wanted to be a teacher. She was already teaching the children in our town back in Missouri, saving money to go to a proper school." "I am sorry," Clara said quietly. The cholera moved through so fast. 1 week, we were all fine. 2 weeks later, I was burying them all. My father, my mother, Sarah. I was too angry to cry at first. I think the tears did not come until months later, and then I could not stop. I cried for 3 days straight. Clara looked at him in surprise. Russell always seemed so controlled, so steady. "What made you stop?" "My neighbor, the man who took me in, he just let me cry. He did not tell me to be strong or to move on. He just sat with me and let me empty myself out. After 3 days, I did not have any tears left, but I also did not have that terrible pressure in my chest anymore. The grief was still there, but it was bearable." "I have not cried since the night my mother died," Clara admitted. "Samuel beat it out of me." Russell's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "Maybe you have not felt safe enough to cry. Maybe there are just no tears left." He did not argue, but she could feel him watching her, patient and steady as the mountains themselves. The nightmares started in mid-November. Clara would wake gasping, her heart pounding, fragments of dreams clinging to her, her mother's face pale and waxy, the crack of Samuel's belt, the smell of death and lavender water, the certainty that she was utterly alone in the world. The first time it happened, she lay in the dark, shaking, trying to will herself back to sleep. But the walls of the bedroom seemed to press in on her, and the darkness was full of ghosts. Finally, she got up and crept downstairs thinking to make tea, to do something to anchor herself in the present. Russell was already in the kitchen, standing by the stove in his undershirt and trousers heating water. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "Nightmares?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I get them too sometimes. Tea helps, or at least it gives me something to do with my hands." He poured hot water over tea leaves in 2 cups and handed her one. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I am sorry. I just want to forget." "That's all right." Russell settled into a chair at the kitchen table, and after a moment Clara joined him. They drank their tea in silence, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the wind outside. "Thank you," Clara said finally, "for not making me explain." "Everyone has ghosts, Clara. You do not owe me your secrets." But sitting there in the warm kitchen, With Russell's steady presence across from her, Clara found herself wanting to share them anyway. I keep dreaming that I am back in that room and my mother is dying and Samuel is hurting me and I cannot make him stop. I cannot make any of it stop. You are not there anymore. You are here and you are safe. Am I? What if Samuel comes back? What if he decides he has a legal right to me because he married my mother? Russell set down his teacup, his eyes serious. Clara, look at me. I will not let anyone hurt you. That is a promise. And legally, you are an adult. He has no claim on you. The law does not always matter in places like this. Then I will make sure it matters. I have got 4 good men who work for me, and we are all armed. Anyone who wants to get to you would have to go through all of us first. Clara felt something in her chest that might have been the beginning of safety, fragile as glass but real. Why do you care so much? Russell was quiet for so long that Clara thought he would not answer. Then he said, because I know what it is like to be alone and scared and convinced the world is nothing but cruelty. And I know what a difference it makes when someone shows you otherwise. You remind me of Sarah a little. Not in how you look, but in your strength. She would have survived if she could have. You did survive, and I think that is worth protecting. Clara's throat tightened with emotion she could not name. I do not feel strong. Strength is not about feeling strong. It is about getting up anyway. The nightmares continued, but they became easier to bear knowing Russell was just across the hall, that she could find him in the kitchen if the darkness became too much. They fell into a pattern of late-night tea and quiet conversation, slowly sharing the pieces of themselves that grief had broken. Russell told her about growing up in Missouri, about his father who had been a blacksmith and his mother who had kept bees, about Sarah's laugh and her terrible singing voice, and how much she had loved books. Clara told him about her own father who had been gentle and kind and completely unsuited to the hard work of mining, about how her mother had never quite recovered from his death, about the slow slide from modest comfort to desperate poverty. She should not have married Samuel, Clara said one night, staring into her teacup. I told her not to, but she was so tired. She thought he would take care of us. Instead, he just took what little we had left. You cannot blame her for wanting safety. That is what we all want in the end. Is that why you are doing this, hiring me to feel safe? Russell looked startled. No, I am doing this because you needed help, and I was in a position to give it, but maybe also because I was lonely. This house is too big for one person. It feels more like a home with you here. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Clara felt her heart begin to beat faster, a flutter of something that might have been hope or might have been fear. Russell, I cannot be what you want me to be. What do you think I want you to be? I do not know. Someone who is not broken. Someone who can feel things properly. I'm all used up inside. I do not think I have anything left to give. Russell reached across the table and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused. Clara, I am not asking you to be anything except yourself. I'm not expecting anything from you. I just like having you here, sharing tea with you, talking to you. If that is all this ever is, that is enough. Clara looked down at their joined hands and felt the first crack in the dam that had held back her tears for months. You should not be so kind to me. It is dangerous. Dangerous how? Because I might start to believe that good things can happen, and then when they are taken away, it will hurt so much worse. Russell squeezed her hand gently. Or good things might happen and keep happening. That is a possibility too. Clara pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. I should go back to bed. Thank you for the tea. She fled before he could see the tears that had finally begun to well in her eyes. December brought the first snow, a light dusting that transformed the ranch into something ethereal and beautiful. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching the flakes drift down and felt a strange tightness in her chest. Her mother had loved snow, had grown up in a part of Ohio where winters were long and white, She would have loved seeing this. The tightness grew, pressing against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. Clara gripped the edge of the sink, trying to push the feeling down, to lock it away the way she had learned to do. But it kept swelling, growing, until she thought she might split apart from the pressure. She barely made it out the back door before the first sob broke free, raw and terrible. She sank down onto the porch steps, wrapping her arms around herself, and cried the way she had not been able to since that terrible night. She cried for her mother, for the life they should have had, for all the words left unspoken. She cried for her father, barely remembered but deeply missed. She cried for herself, for the girl who had been beaten for grieving, for the woman who had been too scared to feel anything at all. She did not hear Russell approach, did not know he was there until she felt his coat settle around her shoulders, until he sat down beside her on the cold steps. He did not speak, did not tell her to stop or calm down. He just sat with her, steady and silent, while she cried months of unshed tears. When she finally ran out of breath, when the sobs subsided into hiccups and shudders, Russell handed her a handkerchief. Clara wiped her face, embarrassed and exhausted. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be. You needed that. I thought I had no tears left. You just needed to feel safe enough to find them again." Russell's voice was gentle. "How do you feel now?" Clara considered this. Her eyes burned, her throat was raw, and her head was beginning to ache. But the terrible pressure in her chest was gone, and she could breathe fully for the first time in months. "Empty," she said, but not in a bad way, just lighter. That is how I felt too after, like I had set down a weight I did not know I was carrying. They sat together while the snow continued to fall, not touching, but close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of him, the solid reality of another person who understood loss and had survived it. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons she should protect her heart. But she was tired of being afraid, tired of being alone, tired of believing that safety was an illusion. "Russell," she said quietly, "when you said you were lonely, that this house felt more like a home with me here, did you mean that?" "Every word." "I think I'm lonely too. I think I have been lonely for a very long time, even before my mother died, and I think maybe you make me feel less lonely." She felt him turn to look at her, but she kept her eyes on the falling snow, afraid that if she met his gaze she would lose her courage. "What are you saying, Clara?" "I'm saying that I'm scared. I'm scared of caring about someone and losing them. I'm scared of trusting someone and being hurt, but I am more scared of spending the rest of my life afraid to feel anything." She finally turned to look at him, meeting those whiskey-colored eyes that had been watching her with such patience. "I am saying that I think I am starting to care about you, and I do not know what to do about that." Russell's face transformed, a smile breaking across his features like sunrise. "You do not have to do anything about it yet. We can take this as slow as you need. I am not going anywhere, Clara. I'm not going to hurt you or leave you. You can trust me, I promise." "How can you promise that? People die, people change, nothing is certain." "You are right. I cannot promise I will never die or that nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise that I will be honest with you, that I will respect you, and that I will do everything in my power to make you feel safe and valued for as long as I am able." Is that enough? It should not have been enough. Clara had learned hard lessons about the unreliability of promises, but looking at Russell, at the sincerity in his eyes and the gentle strength in the line of his shoulders, she found herself wanting to believe, wanting to try. "Yes," she whispered, "that is enough." Russell reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His touch was feather-light, reverent. "Can I court you properly, Clara Whitmore? Take you to dinner, maybe to the Christmas dance in town next week? I do not have anything appropriate to wear to a dance. Then we will get you a dress, or we can skip the dance and just have dinner, if that is too much. Whatever makes you comfortable." Clara thought about the last time she had been to a dance, years ago before her father died, when her mother had still smiled easily, and the world had seemed full of possibilities. "I think I would like to go to the dance," she said. "If you are sure you want to be seen with me, people talk." "Let them talk. I am not ashamed of courting the most remarkable woman I have ever met." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You barely know me." "I know enough, and I am looking forward to learning the rest." The Christmas dance was held in the town hall, which had been decorated with pine boughs and candles. Clara wore a new dress in deep blue wool, paid for with her wages from the ranch, simpler than what many of the other women wore, but well made and flattering. Russell had put on his best suit and hat, and when he offered her his arm, she took it with only a moment's hesitation. Walking into that hall on Russell Dalton's arm, Clara felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispers ripple through the crowd. She knew what they were saying. She was the girl who had worked at the Lucky Silver, the one whose mother had died, whose stepfather had thrown her out. She was not respectable, not quite, and Russell Dalton could do better. But Russell kept his hand over hers where it rested on his arm, steady and sure, and when the music started, he led her onto the dance floor without hesitation. Clara had not danced in years, but Russell was patient, guiding her through the steps, and gradually she relaxed into the music and the movement. "Everyone is staring," she whispered. "Let them. I am too busy looking at you to notice." Clara felt a smile tug at her lips despite her nervousness. "You are entirely too charming for your own good." "Is it working?" "Maybe." They danced 3 dances before taking a break, and Russell brought her punch while she caught her breath. Several of the ranch wives approached, women Clara recognized from town but had never spoken to, and to her surprise they were friendly. They asked about the ranch, complimented her dress, invited her to a quilting circle that met every Thursday. Clara fielded their questions with growing confidence, realizing that Russell's regard had lent her a respectability she had not possessed before. It should have bothered her, that acceptance based on a man's approval, but she found she did not care about the reason so long as she was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. The evening was nearly over when Samuel appeared. Clara saw him before he reached them, weaving through the crowd with the particular deliberation of a man who had been drinking but was determined not to show it. Her whole body went tense, and Russell must have felt it because his hand immediately went to the small of her back, protective. "So this is where you landed," Samuel said loudly enough that several nearby conversations stopped. "Trading one profession for another, are we?" Clara felt the blood drain from her face, but before she could respond, Russell stepped between them. "That is enough. You need to leave." "Or what, cowboy? You gonna shoot me in front of all these good people?" Samuel's voice dripped with mockery. "Everyone should know what kind of girl you are courting. Her mother was a whore, and the apple does not fall far from the tree." The words hit Clara like a physical blow, all the more painful because they were spoken in a room full of people, because she could see the doubt flickering in some of their faces. She wanted to defend her mother, to explain that Margaret had been a seamstress, a good woman worn down by circumstance, but her voice had fled and she could only stand there, frozen. Russell's fist caught Samuel square in the jaw, a clean, economical punch that sent the older man sprawling. The room went silent. "Clara's mother was a good woman who worked herself to exhaustion to provide for her daughter," Russell said, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "And Clara is one of the finest people I have ever known. You are a bitter drunk who beats women and lies to make yourself feel like more of a man. If you ever speak to her or about her again, I will do more than hit you. Now get out of here before I have the sheriff arrest you for public drunkenness." 2 of the ranch hands who had been at the dance stepped forward, flanking Russell, their intentions clear. Samuel scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and humiliation, but he was outnumbered and sober enough to know it. He retreated, spitting curses over his shoulder. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara wanted to run, to hide, to disappear. But Russell turned to her, his expression fierce and tender all at once. "Are you all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles right there in front of everyone. "You are the bravest person I know," he said quietly, "and I am honored to stand beside you." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then building. One of the ranch wives stepped forward, her expression kind. "That man is a disgrace. Do not let him poison a lovely evening, dear." Others murmured agreement, and gradually the tension dissolved back into music and conversation. But Clara had reached her limit for socializing. She looked at Russell pleadingly, and he understood immediately. "Let us go home," he said. They collected their coats and stepped out into the cold December night. The snow had stopped, and the stars were brilliant overhead. Clara breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. "Thank you," she said finally, "for defending me, for defending my mother." "You do not need to thank me for telling the truth." Russell helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. "Clara, Samuel is never going to stop trying to hurt you as long as he is in this town. He is a mean, small man who needs someone to blame for his own failures." "What am I supposed to do about that?" "I have been thinking about it, and I have an idea. But you might not like it." Clara looked at him warily. "What idea?" Russell was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts as he guided the horses out of town. "Samuel claims he has a right to control you because he was married to your mother. But if you were married to someone else, his claim would be void. You would be legally protected." Clara's breath caught. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am suggesting it as a practical solution to a problem. But yes, I suppose I am." He glanced at her, his expression uncertain in the moonlight. "I know it is soon. I know you might not feel ready. But Clara, I care about you. I think I might be falling in love with you, and I would be proud to call you my wife, even if the circumstances are not exactly romantic." Clara's mind was racing. Marriage had always seemed like a trap to her, a way to lose what little independence she had. Her mother's marriage to Samuel had proven that. But marriage to Russell would be different. He had already proven that he respected her, valued her, protected her without controlling her. Would it be a real marriage, she asked quietly, or just a legal arrangement? Russell pulled the wagon to a stop at the side of the road and turned to face her fully. "That would be entirely up to you. I would not expect anything you were not willing to give. If you wanted separate bedrooms, a marriage in name only, I would respect that. But I hope that eventually, when you are ready, it could be a real marriage in every sense. I hope that you might come to love me the way I love you." "You love me?" "I do. I have for a while now, I think. Maybe since that first night in the saloon when you told me everyone is sad about something. You were so fierce and so fragile all at once. I wanted to know everything about you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. But these were different from the tears she had shed on the porch steps. These were tears of something that might have been joy, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. "I do not know if I know how to love anyone," she admitted. "I think grief broke something in me." "Grief changes us, but it does not have to break us forever. Things can heal given time and care." Russell reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "I am not asking you to love me right now, Clara. I am just asking if you will give us a chance. Marry me, let me protect you, and we will figure out the rest as we go." It was terrifying, the idea of trusting someone so completely, of binding her life to his. But Clara thought about the alternative, continuing to live in fear of Samuel, always looking over her shoulder, always alone. And she thought about the past few months, how Russell had given her safety and respect and space to heal, how he had let her cry until she had no tears left, had sat with her in the darkness without demanding anything in return. "Yes," she whispered, "I will marry you." Russell's smile was incandescent. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and kissed her softly. It was Clara's first real kiss, gentle and sweet, and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was trembling, but not from fear. "We will do this right," Russell said. I will talk to the preacher tomorrow, and we can be married before Christmas if you like. A small ceremony, just us and a few witnesses, unless you want something bigger. Small is good. I do not need anything fancy. I just need to know I am safe. You are safe, Clara. I promise you that. With me, you will always be safe. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Kingston, with Dolly from the Lucky Silver and Russell's ranch hands as witnesses. Clara wore her blue dress again, unable to justify the expense of a new one, but Russell gave her a ring of simple gold that had belonged to his mother. The ceremony was brief, the preacher's words familiar and strange all at once. When Russell kissed her at the end, Clara felt the finality of it settle over her, less like a trap and more like shelter. The ranch hands had decorated the house with pine boughs and candles, and there was a cake that Tom had somehow procured from the bakery in town. They celebrated modestly, and when everyone finally left, Clara found herself alone with her husband in the house that was now legally hers as well. Russell seemed to sense her nervousness. "Nothing has to change tonight," he said gently. "Your room is still your room. We can take this as slowly as you need." Clara looked at this man who had been so patient with her, so kind, and made a decision. "I do not want separate rooms," she said. "I want to try. I want this to be a real marriage." "Are you sure?" She was not sure of anything except that she was tired of being afraid, tired of holding herself apart from the possibility of happiness. "Yes, I am sure." Russell took her hand and led her upstairs to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He lit the lamp on the nightstand, the warm glow pushing back the darkness. Then he turned to her, his eyes serious. "If at any point you want to stop, we stop. No questions, no judgment. Understand?" Clara nodded, her heart racing. She had never been with a man, had barely been kissed before tonight, but she trusted Russell, and that trust was enough to override her fear. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands gentle on her waist. Clara let herself melt into the kiss, into the warmth of him, trying to ignore the voice in her head that insisted this was dangerous, that caring for someone only led to pain. When his hands moved to the buttons of her dress, she did not stop him. What followed was tender and awkward and occasionally uncomfortable, but it was also intimate in a way Clara had never experienced. Russell was patient, checking in with her, making sure she was all right, and when it was over, he held her close, his hands stroking her hair while she tried to process the enormity of what had just happened. "Are you all right?" he asked after a while. "I think so," Clara said honestly. "That was not what I expected." "Good unexpected? Or bad unexpected?" "Good, I think. Strange, but good." Russell kissed her forehead. "It gets easier and better, I promise." Clara nestled closer to him, letting herself enjoy the simple comfort of being held. For the first time in months, she fell asleep feeling safe. The winter passed quietly. Clara settled into her role as Russell's wife, learning the rhythms of the ranch, the patterns of the seasons. She got better at cooking, experimented with baking, even tried her hand at managing the household accounts. Russell was patient and encouraging, never criticizing her mistakes, always ready with praise for her successes. In January, Samuel left Kingston. The sheriff stopped by to inform them that he had boarded a stage heading east, apparently having burned through what little money he had and accumulated enough gambling debts to make staying dangerous. Clara felt a weight lift that she had not realized she was still carrying. "He is really gone?" she asked the sheriff. "Yes, madam, and good riddance, if you will pardon me saying so. That man was nothing but trouble." After the sheriff left, Clara walked out to the barn where Russell was working on repairing a saddle. "Samuel is gone," she said. Russell set down his tools and pulled her into his arms. "How do you feel?" "Free," Clara said, and realized it was true. "For the first time since my mother died, I feel like I can breathe without waiting for something terrible to happen." "Good. That is how you should feel." He kissed her slow and sweet. "Now we can really start our life together." Spring arrived, bringing new grass and new calves and a sense of renewal. Clara discovered she was pregnant in late March, and the news filled her with a terror she had not anticipated. "What if something happens?" she asked Russell, pacing the kitchen while he tried to calm her down. "What if I lose the baby? What if something goes wrong during the birth? What if I am a terrible mother?" Russell caught her hand, stilling her frantic movement. "Clara, look at me. None of those things are going to happen. And even if something does go wrong, we will face it together. You are not alone anymore. My mother died slowly and painfully. What if the same thing happens to me? Your mother had consumption, which you do not have. You are young and healthy and strong, and we will make sure you have the best care available." Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear was so strong it threatened to choke her. "I do not know if I can do this." "Yes, you can. You are the strongest person I know, and you are going to be an amazing mother." Gradually, as the pregnancy progressed and Clara remained healthy, her fear began to ease. Russell was attentive without being suffocating, making sure she rested, bringing her tea when she felt nauseous, rubbing her back when it ached. The ranch hands treated her like fragile glass, insisting on doing any heavy lifting, and even Tom unbent enough to offer gruff advice about childbirth based on his own wife's experiences years ago. In late October, nearly a year after Clara had first arrived at the ranch, she gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Clara was certain she would die, certain that this was her punishment for daring to be happy. But Russell stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, and when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Clara felt something inside her shift and settle. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the infant in Clara's arms. "Healthy lungs on this one." Clara looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and dark hair, and felt tears stream down her face. But these were not tears of grief or pain. These were tears of overwhelming love, of gratitude, of the terrifying and beautiful realization that she had created life, that she had someone new to protect and cherish. "He is perfect," she whispered. Russell leaned over them both, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "What should we name him?" Clara thought of her father, barely remembered but deeply loved. "James," she said, "James Matthew Dalton." "James Matthew Dalton," Russell repeated, testing it out. "That is a strong name. Welcome to the world, son." The first months of James's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Clara was terrified every moment that something would go wrong, that she would fail somehow, that she was not equipped to keep this tiny person alive. But Russell was a natural father, patient and gentle, and between the two of them, they figured it out. By the time James was 6 months old, Clara had settled into motherhood with something approaching confidence. She loved watching Russell with their son, loved seeing this strong, capable man reduced to cooing nonsense at a baby. The ranch hands were equally smitten, taking turns holding James and teaching him nonsense words that made Clara laugh. One evening in late spring, when James was nearly a year old and toddling around the kitchen while Clara prepared dinner, Russell came in from the barn and swept them both into a hug. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is always dangerous," Clara teased. "I'm serious. I want you to know how happy you have made me. Before you came here, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was what I knew how to do, but you gave me something to work for. You gave me a family." Clara set down the spoon she had been using and turned to face him fully. "You gave me that too. You gave me safety when I had nothing. You let me cry until I had no tears left, and then you showed me how to be happy again. I do not think I have ever told you how much that means to me." "You do not have to. I see it every day in how you love our son, how you have made this house a home, how you smile now without it looking like it hurts." Russell cupped her face in his hands. "I am so glad you walked into the Lucky Silver that night. I am so glad you let me help you." "I am glad too," Clara said, and meant it with her whole heart. Time continued its relentless forward march. James grew into a curious, energetic toddler who kept them both on their toes. The ranch prospered under Russell's careful management, and Clara's confidence grew as she took on more responsibilities, managing the household accounts, organizing the seasonal roundups, even helping with some of the ranch work when extra hands were needed. When James was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the fear was less overwhelming, tempered by the knowledge that she had survived childbirth once and could do so again. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, an easier birth than James had been, and they named her Margaret Sarah after both their mothers. Margaret was a sunny, easy baby, so different from James's intense seriousness that Clara sometimes wondered how 2 children from the same parents could be so dissimilar. But she loved them both fiercely, protectively, determined that they would never know the kind of loss and fear that had defined her own childhood. The ranch continued to grow. Russell hired more hands, expanded the herd, built a new barn. Clara oversaw the expansion of the house, adding another bedroom and a proper dining room. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in ways that Clara had never imagined possible when she was washing dishes at the hotel and wondering where her next meal would come from. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Russell surprised her with a trip to Carson City. They left the children with Tom and his wife, who had moved into the ranch to help with the increasing workload, and spent 3 days in a real hotel, eating in restaurants, attending the theater. It was the first time Clara had been away from the children since Margaret was born, and while she missed them desperately, she also appreciated the chance to simply be Russell's wife, not someone's mother or someone's housekeeper. On their last night, they sat in a fancy restaurant, Clara wearing a new dress that Russell had insisted on buying, and Russell took her hand across the table. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Clara opened it to find a delicate gold locket. She opened it and found tiny portraits inside, James on one side, Margaret on the other. "I had them commissioned from photographs," Russell explained. "I thought you might like to carry them with you." Clara felt tears well up, but these were the good kind of tears, the kind that came from being deeply loved. "It is beautiful. Thank you." "There is something else." Russell's expression turned serious. "I know we do not talk much about what happened before we met. I know those memories are painful. But I want you to know that I see you, Clara. I see how hard you have worked to build this life, how much courage it took to trust me, to let yourself be happy again. I see all of it, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Clara squeezed his hand, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Finally, she managed, "I love you too. When I met you, I was certain I would never be happy again. You proved me wrong in the best possible way." "We proved each other wrong. I thought I would always be alone, that the best I could hope for was a comfortable existence. You showed me that life could be so much more than just comfortable. You showed me it could be joyful." They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to face whatever came next. And what came next was years of quiet happiness, of watching their children grow, of building a life that felt solid and real. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Margaret was their sunshine, always laughing, always getting into mischief. When James was 10 and Margaret was 7, Clara found herself pregnant one more time. Unexpected but not unwelcome. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and Clara spent much of it exhausted and uncomfortable. But in the spring of 1888, she gave birth to another son, a tiny, red-faced baby they named Thomas William, after Tom and Russell's father. "Our family is complete now," Russell said, holding the baby while Clara rested. 3 perfect children and a wife I adore. I am the luckiest man alive." Clara smiled, exhausted but content. "I think we are both pretty lucky." As the children grew, Clara made sure they knew their grandmother's story. She told them about Margaret Whitmore, who had been a seamstress and a devoted mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion to provide for her daughter. She told them in age-appropriate ways about how hard life could be, about loss and grief and the importance of resilience. "Your grandmother would have loved you all so much," she told them one evening. gathered around the fireplace. She would have been so proud of the life we built. "Do you still miss her?" James asked. He was 14 now, thoughtful and serious like his father. "Every day," Clara said honestly, "but it is a different kind of missing now. It does not hurt the way it used to. It is more like a gentle ache, a reminder of how much she meant to me." Margaret, 11 and wise beyond her years, leaned against Clara's shoulder. "I am glad you met Papa. I am glad we are all here together." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of the ranch, the changing of seasons, the milestones of children growing up. James went away to school in San Francisco studying to be a lawyer. Margaret became a skilled rider and helped her father with the ranch work. Thomas, the baby, grew into an energetic, mischievous boy who kept everyone on their toes. Clara settled into middle age with grace, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the evidence of laughter and sun. She and Russell grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. They still had their evening conversations on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, comfortable in the silence that came from truly knowing another person. One evening, when they had been married for 20 years and Clara was approaching 40, Russell turned to her and said, "Do you remember the night we met, when I told you that you looked sad?" "I remember everything about that night," Clara said. "I remember thinking you were too kind to be real, that you must want something from me. And now? Now I know you are exactly as kind as you seemed, and that the only thing you ever wanted was to make me happy." Russell took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years of hard work. "Did I succeed?" Clara looked out over the ranch, at the sturdy house and the well-maintained barns, at the land stretching toward the mountains. She thought about their children, all healthy and happy and pursuing their dreams. She thought about the life they had built together brick by brick, day by day, from the ashes of grief and loss. "Yes," she said simply, "you succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined." "Good, because making you happy has been the greatest accomplishment of my life." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and thought about the girl she had been beaten for crying at her mother's deathbed, convinced she had no tears left to shed. That girl could never have imagined this future, this happiness, this love. She had been so certain that her capacity for joy had been destroyed, that she would spend the rest of her life going through the motions of living without ever truly feeling alive. But Russell had shown her otherwise. He had given her the space to grieve, to heal, to slowly learn how to hope again. He had been patient when she was afraid, gentle when she was broken, steadfast when she was convinced he would leave. And gradually, almost without her noticing, he had helped her become whole again. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me cry until I had no tears left. For showing me that it was safe to have tears again. For giving me a reason to smile." Russell kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me enough to try, for taking a chance on us, for building this beautiful life with me." They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ranch was quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the wind in the grass. Inside the house, Clara could hear Thomas practicing his piano lessons, the notes slightly off-key but earnest. This was happiness, Clara realized, not the absence of pain or loss, but the presence of love strong enough to carry the weight of both. Not forgetting the past, but building a future that honored it while not being imprisoned by it. Not never crying again, but knowing that when tears came, there would be someone there to sit with her until they passed. "I love you," she told Russell, the words as true and deep as the earth beneath them. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." And in that moment, Clara Whitmore Dalton, who had once believed she had no tears left, who had been beaten for grieving, who had been saved by a cowboy's kindness, felt completely and perfectly at peace. The years that followed were marked by the natural progressions of life. James finished law school and returned to Nevada, opening a practice in Carson City. He married a school teacher named Elizabeth, and they gave Clara and Russell their first grandchild, a girl named Catherine. Margaret, determined and independent, decided against marriage in favor of helping run the ranch, becoming as skilled a rancher as any man in the territory. Thomas followed in his brother's footsteps, heading to school to study engineering, fascinated by the new developments transforming the West. Clara and Russell grew older, their bodies less resilient, but their love undiminished. They hired more help to manage the ranch as the physical work became harder, and they spent more time simply enjoying each other's company, playing with their grandchildren, and reflecting on the life they had built. One winter evening when Clara was 52 and they had been married for over 25 years, a fierce snowstorm trapped them inside for 3 days. They spent the time by the fire, wrapped in blankets, sharing stories and memories. "Do you remember that first Christmas dance?" Russell asked, his voice rougher with age but still warm. "When Samuel showed up and caused that scene?" "I remember you punching him," Clara said with a slight smile. "I was mortified and grateful all at once." "I would do it again in a heartbeat. No one gets to speak about you or your mother that way." Clara reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You know what I realized recently? I cannot even remember what his face looked like anymore. Samuel, I mean. I spent so long being afraid of him, and now he is just a shadow. But I remember everything about my mother. Her smile, her voice, the way she smelled like lavender water. You helped me keep the good memories and let go of the bad ones." "You did that yourself, Clara. I just provided a safe place for it to happen." "You provided more than that. You provided love, partnership, a family. You gave me everything I thought I had lost." Russell pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence listening to the wind howl outside while the fire crackled and popped. These were the moments Clara treasured most. Not the grand gestures or major milestones, but the quiet intimacy of simply existing together, of knowing they had built something that would outlast them both. "What do you think happens when we die?" Clara asked suddenly. Russell considered this. "I like to think we go somewhere peaceful, somewhere we can see the people we love, the people who went before us, your mother, my parents, and sister. I like to think they are proud of what we built. I hope my mother knows about you, about our children. I hope she knows that I found happiness after all the sadness. I'm sure she knows, and I'm sure she is incredibly proud of the woman you became." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were gentle tears tinged with nostalgia rather than grief. "I used to cry every day after she died, even after Samuel beat me. Even after I thought I had no tears left, I would cry in secret. But then I came here, and you let me cry openly, let me release all that pain, and gradually I cried less because I hurt less. You healed me, Russell." "We healed each other," Russell corrected gently. "I was just as broken when we met, just better at hiding it. You gave me purpose. Clara, you gave me a reason to build something that would last. And we did build something lasting, did we not? Look at our children, our grandchildren. Look at this ranch, this life. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "It is more than either of us dreamed," Russell agreed. "And it is only possible because you were brave enough to trust me all those years ago, because you were willing to risk your heart again." Clara nestled deeper into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her ear. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside they were warm and safe and together. This was enough. This was everything. The storm passed, as all storms do, and life continued its forward momentum. Clara watched her grandchildren grow, helped Margaret manage the ranch, and welcomed Thomas back when he finished his studies. The ranch remained successful, adapting to the changing times while maintaining the core values Russell had built it on: fair treatment, hard work, and respect for the land. When Clara turned 60, her entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. James and Elizabeth brought their 3 children. Thomas brought his new wife, a vivacious woman from San Francisco, Margaret, still unmarried but content, organized the entire event with military precision. The house was full of laughter and children and the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering. Russell stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast to my wife, the most remarkable woman I have ever known. 30 years ago, she walked into my life when we both needed saving. She has been my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Clara, you make every day better just by being in it. Happy birthday, my love." Everyone raised their glasses, and Clara felt her heart swell with love so profound it almost hurt. She looked around the room at all these faces, this family they had created together, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all for being here, for being part of this beautiful, chaotic, wonderful family. And thank you, Russell, for seeing something worth saving in a sad girl serving drinks in a saloon, for being patient while I learned how to be happy again, for giving me this life, which is more than I ever imagined possible." The celebration continued late into the evening, and when everyone had finally gone to bed or headed home, Clara and Russell found themselves alone on the porch, watching the stars. 60 years old, Clara mused. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened 18-year-old convinced the world was ending. And sometimes I still feel like the 26-year-old cowboy who fell in love at first sight and spent weeks working up the courage to tell you. Clara laughed. "You never told me it was love at first sight." "It was. The moment you looked at me with those sad eyes and that stubborn chin, I was done for. I just knew it would take time for you to see it." "Well, you were right. It took time, but I got there eventually." "Was it worth the wait?" Clara turned to look at him, at this man who had been her anchor and her salvation, who had loved her through grief and fear and gradually taught her how to love in return. His hair was mostly gray now, his face lined with years of sun and work, but to her he was still the cowboy who had sat with her in the lucky silver and told her she seemed sad. "It was worth everything," she said simply. They sat together under the stars, holding hands, comfortable in the silence that came from a lifetime of understanding. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrible night when her mother died, and she was beaten for crying, to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. She had learned that grief did not kill you even when you wished it would, that tears were not weakness but necessity, that love, when it was real and patient and true, could heal even the deepest wounds. That family was not just blood but choice, built through years of small moments and quiet devotion. She had learned that happiness was not the absence of sadness, but the presence of love strong enough to hold space for both. That healing was not forgetting but incorporating the pain into something larger, something beautiful. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than she thought, braver than she believed, and worthy of the love she had spent so long convinced she did not deserve. "Russell?" she said quietly. "Yes?" "If I could go back and tell that 18-year-old girl what her life would become, she would never believe me. She would think I was lying about the happiness, the love, the family. She was so convinced she had nothing left to give. What would you tell her if you could?" Clara considered this. "I would tell her to hold on. I would tell her that the man who lets her cry until she has no tears left is worth trusting. I would tell her that grief is not the end of the story, just a chapter. And I would tell her that she's going to be okay. More than okay, she's going to be happy." Russell raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am glad you are happy, Clara. Making you happy has been the greatest privilege of my life. You did more than make me happy. You showed me how to make myself happy. You gave me the tools and the safety to rebuild myself into someone who could accept joy." "We did that together," Russell said. "Neither of us could have done it alone." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "Together," she agreed. "That's the best way to do anything." They sat like that for a long time, two people who had found each other in darkness and built a life full of light. The ranch spread out around them, solid and enduring. Inside, their children and grandchildren slept peacefully. Above them, the stars wheeled through their eternal patterns. It was not a fairy tale ending because life was not a fairy tale. There would still be hard days ahead, losses to come, challenges to face, but Clara knew now that she could face them, that she and Russell together could weather any storm. She had been beaten for crying when her mother died. A cowboy had let her cry until she had no tears left, and in doing so, he had given her back her ability to feel, to hope, to love. It was, Clara thought, the greatest gift anyone had ever given her, and she had spent the last 30 years trying to be worthy of it, building a life that honored both the grief that had shaped her and the love that had healed her. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring, together, always together. And that, Clara knew with absolute certainty, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.